I wanted to thank people from the Planck Center. First of all, you all need to know Carla Gower, who is our executive director. Thank you, Carla. Carla, and then Jessica White, who is also from the Planck Center. My assistant, Maureen, where are you? There you are, Maureen. She's my research assistant, and also we have an event planner, Lisa Gill. They're running back and forth between here and the Union League Club because we have a big event there, as you all know, this evening. So anyway, that's the lay of the groundwork for the meeting. Everything else is in your program book, and we're going to get the conference off and running with Ansgar first. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Ron, for introducing me, and thanks to Planck Center for inviting me to give you some highlights of a quite great new study. We just launched it last week in Europe, and we looked at leaders in public relations, in communication management. What we did is interviewing both quantitatively and qualitatively chief communication officers across Europe. And there are two questions which had been identified in previous research, and we were interested to know more about that. These are questions who are aligned to the two key issues who are really on the top of the mind in European heads of corporate communications at the moment. One is how to align communication to corporate goals, and that means nowadays obviously what can you do for your CEO, where you're reporting to, and obviously the CEO nowadays is representing the reputation of the organization. So CEO positioning, CEO reputation was one question we were going to ask in the study. And the other one, which had dropped off several times during the last year in several studies across Europe, was obviously the challenge of managing international communication teams, because all these European companies are all around and going global. This is a research project that is run within the framework of the European Public Relations Research and Education Association, an organization of PR scholars across Europe. And you see that colleagues from 5 universities in Europe were involved in this project. Leipzig University was a leader in this project. It's a quantitative and qualitative study, and you will find a handout, and you will find the full report. It's much more obvious than I can present here on the internet. We did a qualitative survey among 43 global heads of communication of international corporations based in the key European markets, mostly Western and Northern European countries. You see these are large corporations, and we had open-ended questions in the summer of this year. Some of the brands, BMW, ABB, Illy, the Italian coffee maker, for example, are here. There are more, even better known brands who didn't agree to see their logos here. So you see, these are the global heads of communication who were open to speak to us. And we did a quantitative survey even 3 months earlier. It's part of a subpart of a larger annual European-wide survey. But this data here is only presented on parts of the survey, which are focusing on these two key topics and on answers of chief communication officers of corporations, so not non-profits, only corporations. And you'll see also these are listed, and private companies, mostly based, as this reflects the structure of the industry in Europe, in North and Western Europe. There's some of Eastern Europe, but obviously we don't have so many internationally operating companies in Eastern Europe. So here are some of the highlights which might give some food for thought for the discussion. First of all, obviously CEO reputation is important. 90% told us, yeah, for them, it's quite clear that the reputation of the CEO is important for the reputation of the company. But a closer look is necessary, because there's a lot of discussion in the media about CEO reputation rankings, and it's mostly based on media analysis of reputation in the media. But CCOs of these global companies tell us that it's much more important for internal communication, and that's a key answer of 1/4 of the respondents, both in private and listed companies. So change, internal culture, that's a key figure where you need the CEO to position the CEO. But then a closer look shows us that for listed companies, obviously financial communication is important, so the role of the CEO in financial communication, whereas in private owned corporations, and we have a lot of international companies based in Europe who are private owned still nowadays, it's much more important to communicate in the political field and in the public and community field. So there are quite different strategies which are not catched. That was our result today by some of the rankings we see and some of the research we do, because we simply look at CEO reputation and don't reflect it to the different strategies of these quite different companies. At the same time, we looked where there's a managing process behind that. Because if everybody says CEO communication and positioning is so important, and 8 out of 10 told us, yeah, they're working on that, they try to position their CEO. At the same time, if you look at the whole process of managing, it should start with analyzing what is the reputation of your CEO, then planning, having a strategy, having specific instruments for CEO communication, and then obviously evaluating whether you achieved something. You see that the full process isn't there, because only 2/3 have developed either specific communication strategies or instruments, and only 4 out of 10 do not monitor their CEO's reputation on a regular basis based on their own sayings. So probably, in fact, it's even less, but it means the whole process isn't there. So there seems to be a myth about CEO reputation and positioning, but not a real management process, so there's something to do, at least for some of these companies. If you look at the messages used to position the CEO, obviously these are average scores here, so it depends on the company and they have different strategies. But quite interestingly, about 1/3 position their CEOs mainly by talking about their functional competencies or about their ethical competencies, whereas being smart, personal competencies are not really a major issue across Europe. We have specific data for some large countries, and the picture there is quite different. It means if you're going to position your CEO and looking for, let's say, opportunities how to position, it also makes sense to look at different cultures, national cultures, how CEOs in general are perceived there, and this is quite different in some of the large European markets. Here, some of the qualitative quotes tell us that even if those companies who are trying to work on that, they are struggling to do so simply because circumstances are difficult. Here's a quote from a global communication manager of a very well-known brand based in Denmark, and she says, the main issue is simply we have fragmented audiences, we are active in about 20 countries around the world, this company. And even if we have a clear strategy, we need our CEO to be active, to give response, and it's simply not possible to really be there actively at the same time. So there's no real solution for that. What are, to close with this section, the long-term trends in CEO communications? The qualitative interviews showed, interestingly, there were 3 topics really popping up across these European survey. One is quite clearly the humane CEO. In many European countries, we had the tradition of having very distant, nearly invisible CEOs, not really positioning themselves until some years ago. These times are clearly gone, and it's a necessity to talk about CEOs' personalities, going up to home stories, which was a no-go and is still a no-go in some European cultures, but the demand is there. That means obviously there has to be a branding of the CEO, which is not really new, but it's not there at large. And the main problem communication leaders are talking about is that they are investing money of the company into a personal brand of CEO, and how to align that, how to talk about that, what happens if the CEO changes, how to work for, like Deutsche Bank, for example. They have 2 different CEOs at the same time, and a very strong leader of the governing board. So the CCO of Deutsche Bank really is working for 3 different people with 3 different personal brands, and he told me he never knows who of them will be there in 1 or 2 years. Probably one of them, probably 2 of them. So it's a very practical problem for these CCOs how to work with this issue. And one interesting issue, I don't know whether that's the same case in the US, for example, but that's quite clearly in some of the large European markets, in corporate citizenship, in positioning the CEO in the community, in the society. Nowadays, not only the media, but key stakeholders are looking for corporate leaders to become, like it's called here, political personae. So really playing a political role, but at the same time, not being too near to parties and to administration, which is nearly impossible, obviously. But if you do that, we have some examples and some qualitative interviews, some stories where you say there was a big thing, but then there was a shift in the government or some scandal, and the whole situation blew up. So how to integrate CorpCom and public affairs, for example, in this specific aspect seems to be an ongoing issue where these global leaders of communication are looking for solutions. You see, not only answers, it's more a picture of what's really going on and where are those CCOs are really working on at the moment. Not everybody has a solution at the moment, but I think it's most interesting for research to identify what is going on and where more research is needed. And that is obviously linked to the second topic, and it was once again said in these qualitative interviews. The main issue about that is that we are going more global, and they have to handle this issue about CEO positioning, but also other issues, obviously, on an international level. So 3 out of 4 CCOs interviewed state that international communication is important for their corporation, and the same number said that it will be even more important in the next 3 years. But the major challenges are quite simple. But all these companies obviously are communicating internationally, not only since 1 or 2 years. We are still trying to understand what is going on, to understand how to develop communication strategies with political sensitivity, if you think of Eastern Europe or Asia, how to understand public opinion and stakeholders. It's a very simple problem because service providers are not there in some Eastern European or Asian countries. So if you look at media monitoring, that's okay. If you look at a more advanced stakeholder research, it's simply a problem how to work on that with the same standards that they have developed in the key markets like in Europe or the US, and how to understand the structure of the media system. And the second topic which shows up here is the topic of management, how to manage international communication teams. We now have a clear tendency of corporations, for example, BASF in Germany, the largest chemical company in the world. They have part of the headquarters have been moved to Asia. They have a communication team of 60 people based in Hong Kong. So much more of their, let's say, support teams are going to Asia. And the main question how to develop people over there, how to integrate them, is a question where those European-based leaders see a problem, starting with the education and the salary systems and to build them back. So it means, in practice, there's a high personal involvement of these chief communication officers, but at the same time they report about weak organizational structures. Only half of them have solid structures and strategies at the moment, and so they really see a problem there. They're really interested to work on that. And one issue I already mentioned is about monitoring, about simply doing, they all say empirical applied research is needed. We need to understand what's going on, but you can't do it globally. You really have to work on with your local colleagues and have to integrate local service providers for monitoring, for limitation analysis, but it's not there for some of these companies at the moment, and they don't know how to develop it from the corporate headquarters. To end up, what can they do? What did they tell us? One is quite clearly to internationalize the comms function. They clearly understand it's their own job. They have to start with human resources development to source best prospective potential employees also from different countries, and to make their communication structures intercultural and global, and the whole concept of headquarters and, let's say, regional quarters is in discussion at some of the companies. So the really thing is, does it make sense? Do we have global competence centers also in communication, not only in production, they have that already, also in communication at different parts of the world? And if you have 200, 300, or like Siemens company, 2,000 people working in corporate communications, you can do that. If you only have, like, I only know the numbers exactly from German companies, like Adidas, 30 people working in corporate communications, you can't have 3 different competence centers. They're all based in 2 locations around the world. So, in the end, the long-term trend shows us that there's a paradox of centralization which is clearly there at the moment. Everybody says they want to go for one-voice strategies and to align at the moment, but the majority of the qualitative interviews told us they expect them not to last. There's a consensus that central structures will not last because corporations will not be central, and you see some of these movements with these different headquarters, and that will have an effect to the communication function. Probably, and some argue this way, that the functional responsibility to be responsible for really messaging, for communicating, and for listening, which is not there anyway in many companies, it may change, and probably communication is more general management competency for every leader, and that means communication experts will much more coaches and not so much only communicating themselves, which is a totally different job description. And last but not least, that will mean that organizational structures will probably be in the future much more arranged around key change initiatives and special projects and topics, and not so much linked to stakeholders or channels like we have today. And we have some companies who try to experiment with that, but at the moment most of them are in the centralized function, but they feel that it can't go on. So in the end, this study, and you will see the full report if you're interested in that on the web, it gives us some quite interesting insights where there are challenges, where probably more research is needed, but doesn't really give you answers on a broad scale, because these global communication leaders are identifying what they have to do, but they don't really have, or not everybody has an answer at the moment. And I think that makes it so interesting also for research and for professionals to challenge these ideas based on your own corporation or your own country or your own culture, what is going on there. Thanks for your patience.